Okay, let's speak of the difference between a construct and an operational definition. Constructs are, and let me read the definition, are internal attributes or characteristics that can't be directly observed but are useful for describing and explaining behavior. So, for instance, are we familiar with the idea of aggression or depression or despair or anger or intelligence or perseverance or grit? Yes, all of those things are constructs. In order for us to do any sort of scientific research, we have to make those things measurable, and that's what an operational definition is. It identifies a measurement procedure or a set of operations for measuring an external behavior and uses the resulting measurements as that definition, if it's valid, of course. Note that an operational definition has two components. First, it describes that set of operations for measuring, and second, it defines the construct in terms of the resulting measurements. Let's take an example of this. The 1961 Bobo doll experiment at Stanford by Albert Bandura and others. And I always find it interesting that Albert Bandura is still alive and still doing very well at Stanford and is, I believe, roughly at 94, 95 years old. So back in 61, he had an idea that children would mimic aggression. It's a plausible idea, even without reinforcement. B.F. Skinner at that time, who was still then just in his 50s, would have disagreed with that. He would have said something along the lines of, well, we only do things for which we're reinforced. He was a sort of a fatalist behaviorist, if you will. But this idea of mimicked aggression is something that Bandura introduced. He showed that children would follow a model, and in this case we mean a model as an adult figure that they watched play with this bowling pin shaped doll that when you punch it or kick it, it goes horizontal and then springs right back up again. So that's a Bobo doll. And the operational definitions of aggression were punching, kicking, throwing, sitting on the doll, throwing objects at the doll. As you can see in this photograph, there was a ball hanging from the ceiling called a tether ball, and they would throw the ball at it. And interestingly, they actually expanded on the model's behavior. The model did things, and the children went even further, including verbally taunting the Bobo doll. So he was largely ratified in his position that we will mimic things that we see, even things that are sort of aggressive or violent. And of course, this leads to some, I guess you could say, some reservations with respect to what we might see, say, on professional wrestling or things with guns or what have you. You might think I'm a kind of a baby for thinking that, but I think there is something to be said, particularly for professional wrestling, because those young kids imitate those moves that they see on TV. So another one, depression. Is depression a thing? Well, sure. Of course, we know what it's like to feel depressed. We'll often feel depressed in the face of a loss, divorce or death, unemployment, or other things that, for no particular reason, that could be due to a clinical depression that may be biochemical, related to neurotransmitters. The construct is depression. The operational definition is the nature of the answers to these and more questions. What I'm showing you here, speaking of people that are still alive, Aaron T. Beck is roughly 100, I think. His daughter has carried on his legacy, and she might be in her 70s. But there are 23 items, if I'm not mistaken, and the ability to rate depression is generally considered to be the sum of these items. So you can see number 1, I do not feel sad, ranging up to I'm so sad and unhappy that I can't stand it. I'm not particularly discouraged about the future. I feel the future is hopeless and things cannot improve, etc. So if somebody's really, really depressed, the results will show in these numbers. And these scales have been validated. It has been shown to be true over the fullness of time that the nature of the way people answer the questions is commensurate with the way they actually feel. And we can cross-validate these sorts of surveys to reach those conclusions too. If we wanted to have a longer or briefer survey, we can compare those results to the results of an existing one that's known to be valid. So the topic of validity and reliability is a separate one from this, but nevertheless, you can see it's a concrete score. And the person that answered, I think, 23 items, and they answered all 3 of them in the direction of being very sad, of course, they'd have a maximum score of of 69. So anyway, those are just two examples of constructs and operational definitions, but we always need to have some sort of measurement tool in order to perform research.